Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we talk about books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah. So, Lily, let's start this off with something good that happened.
Well, spring has officially sprung. I have no idea if that is true, based on the planets or whatever, but yesterday I got into my car and for the first time it was uncomfortably warm instead of ice cold. So I'm very happy.
That is exciting.
It's exciting. And then today it's gloomy and dark again, but it's so close I can taste it.
It's actually quite chilly here. It is sunny. And previous days have been warm, but like this week there's an icy wind blowing.
Yeah, but we're inching ever closer.
Yes.
I wonder if it is actually spring. First day of spring. Hold on. It is officially spring. It has been for a couple of weeks. So now it actually is. I decree it so. How about you? What's something good that happened this week?
So my something good this week is we recorded our buddy read discussion of All Systems Red by Martha Wells with the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast.
That was so much fun. I had such a good time doing that.
It really was.
Yeah, they're so great to just... It was crazy talking with people who we've sort of met over Twitter, but then getting to know them in a closer to face-to-face interaction.
Almost face-to-face.
It feels like it now. I almost put on my mask before Zoom calls just because in my mental checklist, I'm like, okay, what do I need? I have my pen, I have my paper. Oh, I'm seeing people. I need to put on a mask. Just ingrained.
Yeah. But yes, Charles and Dylan are lovely, and their podcast is fantastic. If you are not already listening to them and following them on social media, you should A, listen, and B, follow.
Especially to the episode that we're going to be on.
Especially to our episode, yes. I think our episode will actually be airing before this episode that you're currently listening to is out. So
no excuse.
If you haven't listened to it, go and listen to it.
Well, Sarah, what are you drinking this evening?
I am switching things up and drinking tea. Good tea.
Ooh, what tea is it?
It is Genmai that I bought from Tandem Tea, which coincidentally I was turned on to because it is Charles from the FTF podcast company. But it's very good tea. What are you drinking tonight?
In a complete coincidence that was not at all coordinated, I am also drinking Tandem Tea Company tea.
Oh my.
I know.
You have good
shocked.
taste in tea. I am actually shocked you didn't mention this.
I know. Surprise. But I am drinking the Garden District, which is an herbal blend, mostly hibiscus and peppermint, with a solid spoonful of honey and just a shot or two of vodka. So
okay, you had me worried there for a minute.
It's a quite delicious cocktail, I have to say.
I'm normally not a fruit tea person, but I could be convinced by the addition of vodka. I think that is an iced tea.
Technically, none of those are fruit, but I know what you mean.
Well, okay, you know what I
mean. I am drinking it cold, yes.
Yeah. Have you read anything good lately?
I have, actually. It is April. I think it's still April, right? Yeah, it is.
It is still April. It is only mid-April.
What is time? I don't even know. Which means it is National Poetry Month. And one of the books that I read for the podcast put me in a very gothic mood. So I reread some Poe, namely The Raven, which is always longer than I remember. For some reason, I think it's only a couple stanzas long, but that thing is practically a whole book. And it's just nice. It's a good poem.
It is a good poem. I haven't read it in ages. And yes, when I think about it, I think, oh, it's just like a page or two.
Yeah. It tricks you.
It does.
But yeah, the language in that gives me shivers every time. How about you?
I read a number of things. I finished reading Seraphina's Lament by Sarah Chorn, which I mentioned in our last episode. It has beautiful prose and absolutely one of the most gorgeous covers I've ever seen. I'm in love with that cover. I know you're not supposed to judge a book by their cover, but
I was just about to say.
Absolutely. Judge this book by its cover because its cover is gorgeous and the book is good too. And then I also read The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, which super hyped on Twitter. Like the relationship between two of the characters is frequently named as like the best duo in fantasy. And I thought that it was a solidly enjoyable book, and I do plan on continuing the series eventually, but I thought that it felt like witty banter substituted for character depth and development for a good portion of the book. So I didn't quite, maybe I had heard too much about it, you know, like
Yeah.
I had too high expectations.
Don't you hate it when that happens?
I know.
Like you could have had such a great experience, but sometimes hearing too much can really ruin a read.
It's funny how that works. And then I'm also reading Children by Bjorn Larson, which is a retelling and reimagining of Norse mythology. And it's good, but I can only read it in small doses because it's very dark at points. There is one scene fairly early on that plays with sexual consent and power dynamics, and it is, oh boy, it's hard to read. Like it was written to be uncomfortable and upsetting, and it's uncomfortable and upsetting.
I never have a problem with that as long as the author did it on purpose.
Oh yeah, I mean, like this is totally intentional,
right?
And we're supposed to feel very skeeved out by what's happening, but
but you still are.
Yeah, so he does a great job at that. But I'm like, oh God, I need to detox after this.
Well, good thing we had some lighter books to read this week.
Yes, indeed.
There is also, of course, I assume you read at least a little bit of Wheel of Time.
I read a grand total of 3 chapters of Wheel of Time last night. So
wow.
I made a ton of progress, as you can see. So I don't have really anything for our Wheel of Time check-in, except that Min is so boring. Like Min has a lot of potential as a character, and I like her in concept, but in execution, I do not care. The more I read about her, the less I care.
It's supposed to be the other way around.
It is supposed to be the other way around. It's a shame because I think she could be a really interesting character. Like I said, I think the concept is great, but I just don't care about her.
Well, hopefully she's not in it too much. I have no idea, but I hope you are released.
She's not a main character, but she shows up. I'm imagining that she will continue to show up through the next 4 books because she is kind of important, or 3.5 books.
God, that series is long. Is it getting old that I complain about it every time and I'm not even the one reading it?
I have complain as much as you want.
All right. Good, because I will.
So Lily, you read a book for this episode of the podcast that, again, I did not read.
Did I ever? This was, Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia was one of the first books I put on our list purely so that I would have an excuse to read it.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I saw it first in a Twitter ad, actually. And the description of it, just, you ever find something and go, oh, Moreno Garcia wrote this book for me. How nice of her.
When you were telling me about it, I was like, oh yes, this is a Lily book. This is definitely a Lily book.
It is. And, well, as the title suggests, it is a Gothic novel, and it really hits all of those tropes so well. I don't know, Sarah, how much Gothic literature you've read, but it's very location heavy.
Mm-hmm.
There's often a lot of moors. You got to have some good fog in there. There's almost always some kind of castle or manor that must be in terrible condition. You can't have like a clean, well-operated house in a Gothic novel. There's all this imagery of just destruction and decay and the sort of trudge of time. It's a very atmospheric genre.
Mm-hmm.
So the main character is usually brought into this setting, often from a romantic entanglement. You think of, Jane Eyre. She marries, what's his face? I should probably remember.
She marries someone.
You know, a young woman marries a guy after knowing him for not long enough and then goes, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? That's basically every Gothic novel. Not actually. Like The Fall of the House of Usher, which is one of the big ones by Poe. It's an old college buddy who decides to visit his friend and then is, stumbling across the moors going, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? There's always that sort of dreaded realization in there at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And there's often a lot of motifs of illness. Either, the main character catches ill or there's a family member who's ill. There's just illness and decay and gloominess. Anyway, this is the genre, and it is all done. I mean, it is all absolutely in this book. It has the added sort of extra dimension in that it does take place in Mexico in the 1950s, which is not a typical setting for a Gothic novel. But I think that really added some, it's weird to say freshness after I just described how dusty and gloomy everything about Gothic literature is. But it definitely added an element that you don't normally get.
Mm-hmm.
And so the main character is Mexican, but the family, the spooky house family, which there's always a spooky house family. They are British, so you still got that good old creepy old Brit element to it.
It wouldn't be a Gothic novel without it.
Really wouldn't. But then in this book, instead of the main character getting married, it's actually her cousin who did. And her cousin sends some very distressing letters back to the family.
Mm-hmm.
And so Noemi, the main character, is sort of sent to find out what the heck is going on.
Mm-hmm. So does the cousin marry into the creepy British family?
Of course. Someone has to.
She's taking one for the team.
Yeah. Well, they're always swept away at the beginning. We don't actually see that in this book because, again,
right,
Catalina is the one who marries into the spooky British family, and that has happened before the beginning of the book.
Right.
Which is part of why this book didn't feel tired.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't just, okay, you just changed Jane Eyre's name and set this in Mexico. It wasn't like that at all. This was actually like its own story.
Mm-hmm.
But as a fan of Gothic literature, it was so much fun. I love that stuff. It's great. Give me some spookiness. Give me some mystery. Ooh, the mystery. Ooh, that's all going to be after the spoiler break because, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to tell you the mystery.
I wasn't even aware that there was a mystery in this.
So that's actually, there's the spooky British house, and the question is always, what the heck is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is always different, which is something I like about Gothic literature. You never know if it's going to have a rational explanation,
mm-hmm.
or if, oh yeah, surprise, undead are real. Like in Gothic lit, it could go either way. But there's always that threat of the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of what I like about the genre. If you're reading a fantasy novel and it starts in New York City, you're like, gosh, I bet something magical is going to happen.
I think that's probably why I'm not attracted to Gothic literature as a genre, because, like, if there's the threat of something I just want the supernatural.
No, I love that. Reading books like this, you really don't know which way it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that journey to me is like, obviously as the reader, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to sleuth through it with the main character. You're there with her.
Right.
And trying to go like, ooh, is she reading the situation right? Do I think she's onto something? Or,
mm-hmm.
I also like mysteries. So,
I mean, I enjoy mysteries, but I want there to be a clean or a clear delineation between, is there going to be magic or is there not going to be magic? Because if magic is hinted at as a possibility, then I'll be disappointed when it doesn't show up. But that's a personal thing.
Yeah, I get that. I would probably be annoyed if every book was like that, but sometimes it's so compelling to go into something and truly not knowing how it's going to end. It's not like a superhero movie where you're like, for some reason, I think the good guys are going to win.
Yeah.
I'm actually really invested in what's happening. And oh man, the mystery in this book. I had to put it down when I was about almost exactly halfway through, just because, I have a life, unfortunately. And I actually had a nightmare about it. It wasn't exactly a nightmare, but there are spooky dreams in this book. The main character starts having scary dreams. And when I woke up, I was like, was I reading too late? Was that the book? Or was that my dream? Like, I could not remember right away, which was a very fun experience. At least, I mean, I had a good time. But just like, it really got into my head.
I feel like that's a mark of a good book, though, is when you have dreams that are connected to it. I don't necessarily want to say it's great when your books give you nightmares.
So anyway, Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. If you like Gothic novels at all, if you like mysteries at all, read this book. Stop listening right now. Go read it.
The rest of this conversation covers various horror topics, such as violence and sexual assault. If you don't want to listen to that content, or you want to avoid spoilers for Mexican Gothic, skip to 3150.
Okay, so I mentioned how it's unclear whether the house is spooky for supernatural reasons or for regular reasons. And I think this book did that in such a cool way.
How so?
The old dilapidated manor has mold growing everywhere, because it's old and dilapidated and there's fog and, it's falling apart. And at one point, Noemi has the theory that maybe we're all getting sick from this mold, and that's why we're all experiencing these strange things. And by we all, she means herself and her cousin for the most part. And then it turns out it is the mold, but that's because the mold has been grabbing the consciousnesses of all the wives that have died there.
Oh my.
And so the ghosts are real. They're in the mushroom colony. Mushrooms, Sarah. I think most of my notes for this book were just mushrooms in all caps.
I mean, I'm looking at our show notes, and yes, there are some notes that just say mushrooms.
It's so cool, though, because, a mushroom circle are all actually just one organism that are connected by filaments underneath the ground. And the supernatural aspect of this book is that the patriarch discovered a mushroom that if you ate would sort of help, it would transfer the memories of the person it grew on. So if you passed away and these mushrooms grew on you and then someone ate them, they would get some of your memories.
Interesting.
And so he, of course, is an evil bad guy and warped that. He would murder his wives and also occasionally infant children. And then, there's some cannibalism and mushroom growing, and basically grew mushrooms on their bodies and created a network of mushrooms throughout this house so that anyone who died there and, their body became part of the mushroom network, their consciousness became part of it. So the ghosts were real. It wasn't, they were being driven crazy by the mushrooms, but it was also magic at the same time. And that was just, so good. But especially because of that reveal, and that is such a logical explanation, just the sickness, basically, the crazy making mold, which I think is a thing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly mold making you sick is a thing. I don't know if it makes you crazy, but...
Isn't that one of the theories of the witch trials? Is that everyone was eating moldy bread and it made them go crazy?
I do not recall.
Or have hallucinations. I think that's been dismissed, but I think there is mold that can cause you to hallucinate. Anyway, it was a solid enough theory that, like I said, I honestly did not know if that was true or not reading this book.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds quite logical.
Yeah, so Catalina and Noemi are seeing these ghosts, and they're like, oh God, I'm going crazy. Like, why? Is it just the isolation? Like, why am I losing my sanity? And then it turns out, no, it's all real. The mushrooms. I think mushrooms are really cool.
Mushrooms are really cool.
And that's also an aspect of, I didn't want to get into it in the opening part because I felt like it would lead a little bit. I guess I kind of got into it anyway. But another trope of Gothic literature is science versus mysticism, which comes out a lot in, like, is this house haunted or is there just an insane woman locked in the attic kind of thing?
Yeah.
Which is the plot of more than one Gothic novel. And so that's Jane Eyre. And then in the Fall of the House of Usher, they buried someone before she was actually dead. And so all of the banging is her trying to get out of the tomb.
Oh, that's terrifying.
It is terrifying.
That is
It's truly horrifying. And they're just scary. I like my books spooky sometimes.
I mean, I'm also not much of a horror person, so.
Oh, horror is right horror. So in Mexican Gothic, there is just about every flavor of horror you can imagine. There's the light, almost romantic horror of the spooky house, the spooky British house, which they describe as looking like it could have come from a Gothic novel. More than once, which is too many times. The book is already called Mexican Gothic. Like, I get it. Okay. So there's that. And then there's, of course, the sort of run-of-the-mill haunting horror, which is boring to me. Maybe not boring to me, but
commonplace. Not
my favorite kind of horror. Yeah, there's ghosts. All right.
Yeah.
But then there's some, like, truly awful body horror because the patriarch has been using his mushroom network to transfer his consciousness into his children.
Ooh.
So he's basically living forever, right? Because everyone connected to the mushrooms are also connected, like, mentally. If you're infected by the spores, you are connected to this. It's one organism. It's a mushroom network.
Yeah.
And so by raising his children in this house, they're all so infected that when he dies, he can just possess them, basically.
Oh.
But we see him right at the very end of his life, and he has mushrooms growing out of him and boils, and he's a monster. He's a mushroom monster. So there's just some, like, truly unsettling body horror there. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we also get what I would consider more of a psychological horror, where when you're infected with these spores, they can influence you. They being the spooky British family.
Right.
So the main character is sexually assaulted by one of the other characters multiple times. She thinks they're just nightmares for a while and then finds out maybe if he was doing it on purpose, then that still counts. But what makes it so extra horrifying is because the spores are exerting influence over her mind, she's into it while it's happening. It's only afterwards she realizes those weren't her thoughts, basically.
Oh.
So it's just that sort of extra cerebral, not only being out of control of your actions, but being out of control of your own emotions is like, it's magical mushroom roofies. Like, that is just such a...
Yeah. Unpleasant, yeah.
Extremely unpleasant. So it really hits, like, whatever type of horror you like, it'll hit that. There's also, like I mentioned, cannibalism, because they're eating the bodies of people infected by mushrooms to keep the mushroom thing going.
To be extra mushroomy.
That's basically exactly, yes, to be extra mushroomy.
Yes.
And then also, this was what I definitely didn't mention up top because it's kind of a reveal when it happens in the book, when you find out in the book. But not everyone can be absorbed into the mushroom network. Not physically, mentally. Not everyone is compatible, is what they say. And so to make sure he always has a compatible host, the patriarch is just super incesty.
Oh.
He has a son and a daughter, and then he possesses the son and then uses the daughter to make more children. And this basically has been going on for hundreds of years. So
is compatibility like a genetic thing?
Well, that's how it's explained. It's not confirmed, though, because he's also like a psychotic eugenics guy. And so maybe he's just nutso.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah.
Because that was his excuse, basically, for grooming his entire family for 500 years or however long it's been. But then they coerce these two young Mexican women to come to their manor, and guess what? They just happen to also be super compatible. Wow, what a coincidence. Or maybe that's not a thing and you're just a creepy psycho. Because they try to say, wow, we wouldn't think someone of your stock, or however they put it, some creepy, gross eugenics way of saying it, would even be compatible with our amazing, long life mushrooms. But is that really a rare thing, or are they just crazy nutso?
Yeah, I think they're probably just crazy and racist.
I think probably. And then, incest leading to the fall of the creepy British family is also a common theme in Gothic literature. I couldn't bring that up, though, because finding out that the patriarch has been doing this for hundreds of years is kind of a big deal. Something I absolutely loved about this book, though, is it also has some repeated imagery of fairy tales. And at the end, Noemi is basically the prince who rides up to the castle to save the princess. But the princess is the youngest son of the family, who is not as indoctrinated as everyone else. He still can't totally control himself, but he doesn't agree with it the way everyone else does.
So is it a romance between Noemi and the youngest son?
Eventually, yes. She kind of low-level flirts with him the whole time, but that's just sort of her character. She flirts. She's a flirty lady. That's fine. She's a society girl, which is maybe not exactly the phrase I mean, but you know what I'm saying. She goes to fancy parties, and that's just how she interacts with people. But he has literally never met anyone else, so he's very overwhelmed by it. But then she starts to actually really care for him, as a person, because he's the only semi-normal one. And then you also find out he's really the only semi-normal one, and she saves him. She literally has to carry him out at one point. So it's very fairy tale in that way, but a nice reversal of it.
But they can't, if he's never had any sort of outside contact, they can't have a relationship of equals.
I was being a little dramatic. He's been to the little village that the castle, the manor is.
Okay, so he's not completely sheltered.
No, he has met other people. He's the only person in the family who can actually speak Spanish.
Okay.
And so that's how they plan her, how he helps her escape. Because the house is full of mushrooms. They can hear everything they're saying anywhere you are in the house. But all of those racist fucks never bothered to learn Spanish. So Francis is the good guy's name. He's the only one who bothered. So they can speak in Spanish to make their plans to escape. But so he would go into town for errands, but he never stayed overnight there. So it wasn't like he had friends.
Right.
I agree. They aren't running off into the sunset to get married. She just says, of course you're going to come to Mexico City, where she's from.
Mm-hmm.
You can't stay he's trying to stay in the house while it's burning down, because he does, like, where else will I go? This is the only place I know.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, no, like, I'll take care of you. Don't worry. Like, I'll look out for you. I'll help you reintegrate into society, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sweet.
What happens to the cousin?
Also saved.
Oh, good.
I know. Yes, Catalina's also saved. She's actually the one who manages to throw off the mind control long enough to kill well, she doesn't actually manage to kill him, but she harms him enough that they can start to run away. And she also murders her husband, who is complicit and does like this whole system they have going on there, which I was really happy for her. She's basically catatonic through most of the book, but with her cousin there, she is able to sort of get the willpower to destroy these people who have tried to basically kidnap her
and kill her
and take her life away. And yes. Eventually, yes. But I'm glad that she was able to have that moment instead of Noemi just saving the whole thing.
It gives her back a little bit of agency, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. That was really one of the overarching themes of this book. Is even Francis, even though he doesn't like what his family is doing, he doesn't even try to go against them until Noemi is there and gives him a reason to try. Very dark book in some places, but it had a very satisfying, fulfilling, and optimistic ending with the spooky house burning down and destroying all of the mushrooms in it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It did make me hungry for grilled mushrooms, though.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Doesn't it?
It does.
It's that time again. Time for us to take another step on our journey to the center of the Discworld.
Dun dun dun.
Actually, we already played the music, but thank you.
You're welcome. I just wanted to contribute something.
You contribute everything. You can contribute the title of the book for this episode.
Yes. So for this journey to the center of the Discworld, we read Equal Rights, which is the third book in the Discworld series, published in 1987. The publication page.
Of course, written by Sir Terry Pratchett.
Oh, did I not mention that? I did not mention that.
Does it go without saying? Hopefully. Maybe.
I feel like if you've made it this far, you have presumably listened to us talk about a journey to the center of the Discworld before, and so would know that Discworld is Terry Pratchett. I don't know.
Or read the episode description.
Or read the episode description, that too.
But we're now getting into what we consider more legit Discworld. Because the first two books are definitely Pratchett finding his sea legs, so to speak.
Yeah, this is more like Discworld's final form. Like there are still some bits of it that are not where he's still experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
But it's much closer to what you would expect from a traditional quote unquote Discworld novel.
It feels wrong to refer to Discworld as traditional.
It does somehow.
How many books are in this series as a whole? We keep talking about Discworld, but I don't think we've actually mentioned how long it is.
I think it's, I want to say it's 41 books.
Damn, I gotta stop making fun of Wheel of Time.
Yeah, 41 novels, the internet tells me.
They mostly stand alone, though. Discworld does.
Yes, they are standalone books. I mean, there's character progression, but I think for the most part, if you pick one up, it doesn't matter if you've picked up a previous book. And they're also much shorter than the Wheel of Time books.
That's true. And that's extra true for Equal Rights, because it has almost nothing to do with the first two books, other than being set in the same world.
Yeah, I don't think that there are any characters in the first two books who appear in this. It does involve wizards, but even the wizards are different.
So the location is the same. You have the Unseen University, which is the Wizarding School. But other than that, that's about the only overlap.
Yeah, the map is the same.
I don't think the character Death even showed up. He's sort of implied at the beginning, but you don't actually hear any dialogue from him, which is very strange.
No, you do hear dialogue from him.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Otherwise, is it even Discworld?
I guess Death as a character is the overlap, but beyond him, and he's only in the beginning for a very small portion of it.
Now, the premise of this book, as you might have gleaned from the title, delves into the conflict between witches and wizards, or witchcraft and wizardry, I should say. The conflict is not so much between the people as it is between the concepts of the two, or at least that's what's on the page. Pratchett is using these two sort of conflicting magical philosophies to really look at the construct of the patriarchy, the artificial barriers presented to women trying to interact with traditionally male spaces. I could go on.
Yeah, I mean, as expected from a Pratchett novel.
He does this by introducing a woman who is destined for wizardry. And he does that in sort of a he plays on the shortcomings of tradition in a really cool way, I think.
Yeah. So the book starts out with a wizard going in search of someone that a wizard who knows that he's dying, going in search of someone that he can leave his magic to. And he goes to a house that is about to have an eighth son of an eighth son. And he says, okay, I'm going to leave my magic to your son. And then he dies. And then right as that happens, it's discovered that, oh, whoops, it's actually an eighth daughter. And so then you get into, well, she has wizard magic, but she's a woman or she's a girl, and girls don't learn wizardry. That's specifically a male job or a male magic. And so the book is an exploration of her attempts to learn wizardry, and Pratchett's commentary on this sort of arbitrary divide between the sexes.
Okay. Why should you read this book, Sarah?
You should read this book because it has Granny Weatherwax in it.
Oh, you should read every book with Granny Weatherwax in it.
Yes. See, that's why it's part of my argument for why you should read this book. But it is a fun exploration of
it uses magic as a metaphor, of course, unless you're hiding something from me, Sarah. But it uses that to explore the false concept that the genders have different capabilities.
Yeah.
Maybe a better question is, should you read this book first? Because I think our answer is going to be, read all of Discworld. Duh. Done. But should this be your first Discworld novel?
I don't think this should be your first Discworld novel. I think it's okay if it is. It's certainly a better entry point into Discworld than the first two books. But I think that he's still finding his feet. And even though it's much closer in form to what Discworld will be, it's still better to start where he has a better grasp on the characters and what he wants from the series.
I would agree. This is definitely one of those that when you know where he's going with it, you sort of bring that to this book.
Mm-hmm.
To avoid spoilers for equal rights, skip to 5650.
I wanted to put a spoiler break there because I wanted to say something I'm really glad Pratchett didn't do, but that's kind of a spoiler if he didn't do something, right?
Yeah, I think that would constitute as a spoiler.
I'm really glad he didn't just rehash that old "so she dressed up as a boy" thing. I think that could have been a really obvious way to go.
Yeah, it feels like a fresh take on it because she goes to the university as this 11-year-old girl who's insistent that she learn magic. And she's told no. And Granny Weatherwax, who is the witch for her village, who is with her on this trip into the city, into Ankh-Morpork, finds an inn for her, but it means that she goes to the Unseen University as like a servant. Like she goes there
As a maid.
She gets in as a maid. Yeah, she's not actually there as a student.
I think so she dressed up as a boy is not overdone, but has been done.
It has been done. You don't. There's not a lot of things to say about that.
And I think there's something else to be said in this is a story about a girl who wants to be a girl wizard. That's, that's her whole goal. It's not, pretend to be something you aren't, change who you are in order to get this power. It's you can be a girl and be a wizard.
That's a very good point, actually.
It has a whole different sort of impact to it.
Yeah, because if she was going to change who she was, I feel like the story goes she would just learn witchcraft. But
right.
Ultimately, it's shown that her, I don't want to say type of magic, but her method of using magic is pretty incompatible with witchcraft. That's just not the way that she works.
Mm-hmm. Although a lot of the things she does is also not typical wizardry, which is sort of brought up in the book. She's doing things that wizards don't think are possible just because no one has told her they're impossible.
Exactly. There's a really good quote about that. It is well known that a vital ingredient of success is not knowing that what you're attempting can't be done. A person ignorant of the possibility of failure can be a half brick in the path of the bicycle of history.
And I think that's such a great hint early on. We sort of discussed this a little bit out of the podcast, but I feel like where this book ends is that witchcraft and wizardry aren't actually different magics themselves, because that's a refrain through the whole book. All of the characters are saying witchcraft is women's magic and wizardry is men's magic. But at the end, you do sort of see where they overlap, and it leaves you off thinking, or left me thinking, they're probably not different magics, they're just different ways of approaching it.
Yeah, they have the same source, but different ways of going at it.
Right. And that made me think of the concept that women aren't actually more emotionally intelligent than men. They're just socialized to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so witchcraft isn't women's magic. Witchcraft is just the type of magic that women are socialized to perform. We do see a sort of battle of magic near the end between Granny Weatherwax, the main character's guardian, and the head of the wizarding school. Granny does eventually charge in there and demand to be taken seriously. This is near the climax of the book. She doesn't do that to get the main character into the school. She does it to save the world, because sometimes things are necessary and sometimes you can find a way around it, which is sort of her whole point.
Yeah.
But by then, she charges in there, and they go at each other using the same stuff. Like, they're transfiguring each other, and like, that's the same magic.
I think two things. I think you have a point there, but also my interpretation of that scene was so different, because when I read it, I was thinking, oh, this is exactly like the Sword in the Stone. So I was feeling more the reference that it was making to, like, the callback it was making to other work, and not so much the reference that it was making to, like, the thematic reference that it was making.
Right.
Because it is exactly like the scene between Merlin and Madame Mim in The Sword in the Stone.
Well, that's excellent, and something I did not get at all.
Yeah. I had to do a lot of Googling because it's been ages since I've read The Sword in the Stone, and even longer since I've seen the movie. And I couldn't remember who Merlin was battling. And it was very hard to find that information.
I do want to talk a little bit about Granny Weatherwax for a second. She is incredible and amazing, and I love her.
I think Granny is actually my favorite. Probably if I had to rank characters in Discworld, which please don't make me do because that would be cruel. I think Granny would be my number one.
She has this, someone calls her Mrs. or Mom or Mom or, you know, Mother Weatherwax or something like that. And every time she corrects them and says, I'm no one's mother. Granny, and then someone asks who she's Granny of, and the main character says, well, sort of everyone, I suppose.
I really like Granny because I feel it's very rare that you find a character who plays this version, like plays this part of an old lady like crone in the trio of witches, which doesn't show up in this particular book, but we'll get there eventually. But that's kind of her choice. Like there's a good quote where Esk says, didn't you want to get married? It was Granny's time to think. Never got around to it, she said at last. Too many other things to do, you see. And it's nice to see someone who just kind of doesn't care about marriage and relationships.
Right. She's not making a big deal out of it.
Yeah. It's
not
is.
dramatic. Yeah.
She's not bitter about it.
I think you and I have discussed this off the air, but the witches in Discworld are really reminiscent of, I think it's an agreed upon thing that witches, the real women, were just medicine women who, you know, gave herbal cures for things like maybe birth control, which is not explicitly stated in the book, but that's because the main character, Esk, is young, and so they don't want to actually spell it out in front of her. But it's clearly,
it's heavily implied.
It's very heavily implied.
Yeah, like it's there in the text. It's just they don't say those words, but it's there.
And this isn't exactly on topic, but I just really love the connection between that old witch story that a young woman goes off into the forest and trades her firstborn child for some kind of future, some goal, some personal goal. And how closely that mirrors the concept of abortion. And these were probably stories created to vilify these medicine women who were just performing, you know, a medical procedure. But that idea of trading a firstborn child for a future, it just like really clicks, I think. And I think that's very neat and not exactly on topic, but the witches in Discworld do the same thing, so I'm going to say it counts.
They provide those services.
Yeah. And then also, you know, magical Viagra and whatever else.
except that most of it is just pretend.
Or herbal.
Or
not
herbal.
necessarily pretend, yeah.
But there's
headology.
Yeah, there's headology. Like, yeah, Granny has a quote about people will believe it if you make a production out of it. So she says, listen, said Granny, if you give someone a bottle of red jollop for their wind, it may work, right? But if you want it to work for sure, then you let their mind make it work for them. Tell them it's moonbeams bottled in fairy wine or something.
Which is also a real thing. I mean, we all know that placebos have a whatever percent success rate. 10 or something. I don't know.
They have a success rate.
Yes. But there are studies that show if the placebo is perceived to be expensive or exclusive, the success rate goes up.
I mean, I feel like that's the same way that people get you to buy things. They tell you that it's exclusive or you're getting a great deal, even if it's an imaginary deal.
Right. But like people actually say, like, yes, they had a better reduction in pain or whatever if they paid a lot of money for it.
There's a mental component.
There is absolutely a mental component, just in I'm going to use the word wellness. Just everyone know I'm rolling my eyes at the same time. But there is, and the witches in this book tap into that very successfully.
And Granny in particular.
Oh, she's a
Yeah.
master. She's incredible.
Yeah.
She's also one of the few characters in this book that stay the same. Not the same, but
Her character gets refined as Terry Pratchett
in later books.
writes more Discworld. Yeah, in later books. But there are a lot, well, not a lot. There are two kind of what I would call like proto characters in this book where you can see there are direct parallels between them and characters who show up as side characters in later books.
Parallels or almost direct carbon copies with a different name.
Yeah.
They are. Like, that's underselling it.
I mean, I think one of them is more of a parallel, like Simon, who is similar to Esk going into the Unseen University to study wizardry, except that he's a man, so he actually gets in.
Kid. He's a kid.
He's a kid. He's like 14 or something.
Yeah. But male, yes.
But male. So he gets in. But there are parallels between him and I want to say like graduate studies wizard in later books, Ponder Stibbons. And that's not a direct like one-to-one relationship between those two characters, I don't think. But
they're a young wizard or student who is approaching magic from a much more STEM-based approach versus the old stodgy sort of, we're wizards and we're going to sit around smoking pipes.
They have a more scientific approach to magic as opposed to the smoke and mirrors approach of the traditional wizards at the university.
Mm-hmm.
But the character of Katangle, however his name is pronounced, who is the Arch-Chancellor of the Unseen University in this book, is, as you said, basically a one-to-one
prototype
carbon copy. Yeah, prototype of Arch-Chancellor Ridcully, who is the Arch-Chancellor later on in the series. They're both Arch-Chancellor of the Unseen University. They're both from the same place, the Ramtops.
They both have a crush on Granny, which who doesn't? Also
fair. Yeah. So he's very clearly proto Ridcully. Like Pratchett clearly has an idea for this character that he wants to explore, and he ends up doing it through, I mean, he changes some aspects of Katangle, the name and things like that, but
it really makes me wonder why he changed his name but not Granny Weatherwax's.
Ridcully sounds better.
Maybe that's it. Maybe the character only changes because Katangle is a bad name.
Yeah. And I think that Ridcully gets some minor character changes. But
so does Granny Weatherwax.
So does Granny Weatherwax, it's true.
So if he's going to keep Granny, why? But maybe it was just the name. I really think maybe that was it.
That's the only reason I can think of, given that the character history and background and profession is so exactly the same.
You know whose name doesn't change?
Because they don't have one?
Well, he has a title. The Librarian.
The Librarian is wonderful. The Librarian is also a favorite character of mine.
Oh, he's incredible. So during the shenanigans in the first two books, there's a lot of chaos happening. And at one point, the Librarian at the Unseen University gets turned into an orangutan.
In the first book.
It's the first one?
Yeah, okay. This happens in the first book.
They're the same. They're just one book in my head.
I honestly thought for the longest time that it happened in the book that I think is next in the series. And so when we were rereading this, or when we were rereading a Color of Magic, I was a little bit astonished to find that the Librarian undergoes that change then.
From the very beginning, Death and the librarian are the only two constants.
Not taxes.
Not taxes. The librarian is much better.
The librarian is much better.
And in this book, he's introduced. They don't go into how it happens. You could read The Color of Magic if you want to find out. But they do say something like any attempts to change him back have been thwarted because the librarian much prefers it this way, which is just so excellent.
The librarian is an excellent. I don't have anything to add except that the librarian is an excellent character.
He only says ook, but everyone can understand exactly what he means, which is so charming. And he likes having extra long arms because he can reach the books better.
A very fair point.
He's the librarian. It was just a crying shame that we didn't bring him up earlier when this actually happened to him. But now we're actually seeing him as the custodian of these incredibly dangerous magical tomes. And he is just a happy little orangutan swinging around, eating bananas. He's very sweet. So our only common characters through all of Discworld are the librarian and, of course, as we mentioned before, Death, who has an excellent quote at the beginning that you pulled out that I think would be a really nice thing to end this on.
Yeah. So Death has come for this wizard who kicks off all of the events of this book. And he's realized too late that Esk is a girl. And so he's left his magic to a girl and not an eighth son of an eighth son, as he thought he was. And he says, but she's going to have a lot of problems. Death responds, that's what life is all about. So I'm told. I wouldn't know, of course.
You tell him, Death. You tell him. Now, Sarah, I remember an avalanche of tweets a little while ago about this. It was a series of letters that were published, I believe. Or was it an autobiography?
No, it's a collected letters. Yeah. So about 6 months ago. No, I say 6 months ago like it's still December.
Time is an illusion.
Time is an illusion. About 9 months ago, I was reading a book of collected letters by Freya Stark, Over the Rim of the World. And I've mentioned Freya Stark in earlier podcasts. And I don't want to go into too much depth about her because A, it's been 9 months since I've read this book of letters, and B, I haven't actually read any of her works besides these letters. So I feel like I can't speak. I feel like I would be doing her a disservice to talk too much about her. But
why do I care about her letters?
But why do you care about her letters? Yes. But she is a really interesting character. So a character, I say. She's a really interesting person.
But she's a person, yeah.
She is a person, despite the name sounding like the love child of Tony Stark and Loki.
That's funny because I was going to say she sounds like a Game of Thrones character.
That too.
The forgotten Stark child.
That too, yeah. But so she was an Anglo-Italian explorer who was born in 1893, died in 1993. So she got to the ripe old age of 100. She taught herself Latin as a child. She went to university to study language at the age of 30 because she decided that she didn't want to be a flower farmer anymore.
That's a job?
That apparently it was then.
It sounds much more fun than I suspect it actually was.
I think it was very hard and not particularly money making.
I'm just imagining someone like skipping through rows of flowers, smelling them, but I doubt that's actually what the job entailed.
Don't think it did. So she went back to university to study She went to university to study language at 30, and she decided to study Arabic and Persian. And she was one of the first people really to explore the Middle East without any other, like just by herself and with the help of the locals, like without any big Western group of explorers. So fascinating person.
She does sound like an adventure novel character.
She really does, yeah. But her letters I enjoyed both for the content, because she had this really interesting life, and for her writing, which I thought was very poetic and lovely. One of the tweets or one of the quotes that I pulled out for this barrage of tweets back in June was, I am on my way back to Famagusta and the sea for a week before trying to get away from the island with A, 8 small bags, B, a new fur coat of Cyprus goats, C, a barrel of sherry, D, 12 cases of wine, E, a case of olive oil and possibly cheese, which that's just my kind of person.
I like her priorities.
Yes. Those are the kinds of souvenirs and the quantity that I could imagine myself going for.
Whenever that like getting to know you question gets asked of, what person from history would you like to have dinner with? I feel like she should be everyone's top answer.
She really should. I mean, she was such an interesting person. And like she says in another letter, a woman asked if I didn't think it time for us to give up using our lipsticks, but I mean to be killed if it comes to that, with my face in proper order, because she was in Baghdad when there was a coup or something.
Or something.
So like she was in 1941. She was, I marked the page. 4 Iraqi colonels staged a coup in Baghdad and besieged the embassy. So the British embassy in Baghdad was besieged and things were kind of dangerous, it sounds like.
That is the impression I get, yes.
Yeah, from what she wrote in her letters. But she had her priorities. She also said something about the US that I think is still relevant. I think the underlying cause is that this country does most of its thinking through business brains, and your loss is my gain is the basis, which is not necessarily, I mean, especially today, is not necessarily, it's something that you think, yes, obviously, but to have come to that conclusion in 1943 and have it still ring true in 2021 is just, I think that she was a perceptive woman.
It sounds like it. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we'll have to read one of her actual works for this podcast.
I really want to read her account of her travels through the Alamut Valley, which is the Valley of the Assassins in Iran. I haven't yet, but it is on my TBR list.
Let's put it on the calendar.
Okay.
3 years from now, however long out it is.
I think that probably would be something that we would have to read in pieces because it would be denser than a lot of our normal reading, but it would be fun to discuss.
Maybe I smell a segment coming on.
Yeah. A Freya Stark check-in.
A little less lighthearted than Journey to the Center of the Discworld, but that's okay. We have depth.
We do have depth. I would be down. She is not entirely unproblematic, as expected from someone who was born in 1893.
We can acknowledge that.
Yeah. I think in general, she just had a fascinating life and a way with words that makes her well worth reading even now.
I look forward to it.
So you sent me a text earlier today, Lily, because you had a words are weird proposal.
Oh, these words are so extremely weird, Sarah.
What are your weird words?
I saw a catering van, and I cannot for the life of me remember the company because their tagline was scratch-made food. That
just does not sound right.
That's wrong, right?
It is definitely, yeah. That's weird.
I can't describe why it's wrong, but it's definitely not correct.
No, I mean, like, food made from scratch? Yes, okay. That's legitimate.
That's a phrase. That's a thing.
Yes. Scratch made food. No.
No. I did Google the phrase made from scratch, and it sounds like we are linguistically correct, not just spiritually correct.
Oh, good. I always like to be correct on multiple levels.
Yes. Apparently it's from something in sports where they scratch a line in the dirt for where you start or where the boundaries are. Mm-hmm. So made from scratch is made from the very beginning. So the from is a very important word in that linguistic construction. It is not scratch made. It is made from scratch. That is, scratch is not how you are making it. It's where you started. That's important. It's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same.
It was like when you get food stuck in your teeth and it just bothers you so much but it was those words in my head. It was bad words stuck in my head all day, and I had to talk about it because what were they thinking? Someone signed off on that.
They made a choice.
They made the wrong one.
They did make the wrong one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
You can get in touch with us on Instagram and Twitter at @FictionFansPod, or shoot us an email at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to give us a rating or maybe even a review on Apple Podcasts, or follow us on Spotify.
Have a great 24 hours. Bye.
Bye.